Thank you, everybody, for your interest in hearing about our latest tax scheme. It's not always easy to make tax interesting, but this new scheme, the Developing Countries Trading Scheme, is really important for anybody who is importing goods from developing countries. So, of the exhibitors here at Source Home and Gifts, about half of the countries are eligible for the Developing Countries Trading Scheme. Not half of the exhibitors, but half of the countries represented fall within this scheme. Can I just ask whether anybody here is familiar with either the EU's or the UK's Generalised Scheme of Preferences, GSP? Does that ring any bells with anyone? No? So this scheme, the Developing Countries Trading Scheme, is the UK's new scheme that is for unilateral preferences. So I think people will be familiar with trade tax. The UK has a global tariff that sets the tax rate at the border for imports from any country. It's the global tariff. It's actually a very generous tariff. A lot of imports can come in at paying no tax at the border. But in addition to that, for imports from the poorer countries in the world, we have this scheme which we offer unilaterally. It's not a trade agreement. It's not a bilateral deal. It is the UK saying we will go even further in lowering the tax you pay at the border if you're importing from certain countries. So, Rupert, if you would just... The scheme was launched in the middle of June and has been very well received. So it does more than just set the tax rates, and Rupert and Sabiha will talk through some of those details. I forgot to ask you to introduce yourselves. So I said I'm Karen Johnson.
Hi, I'm Rupert Caston. I'm a policy advisor in trade for development at the UK Foreign Office.
Hi, I'm Sabiha Ahmed. Yeah, I work with Karen and Rupert in trade for development.
So we are part of the team in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office and Department for Business and Trade together that have been designing and getting into law this new tax scheme, this new scheme, Developing Countries Trading Scheme. And it was well received in the countries we have visited to talk with exporters about the opportunities, the lower taxes, the wider range of rules of origin, the changes to some of the conditions related to the scheme. You can see our Foreign Secretary. Here is our boss, Paul Whittingham, who heads Trade for Development. We have coverage from Bangladesh, I think, which is the country which is the biggest user of the predecessor scheme and presumably of this scheme because of primarily the textile exports. So the reception by users of this new scheme is at this stage favourable. We're in early days, but we have tried to make it simpler and more generous, and that we hope is how users will experience it as everybody begins to use it. Can we go to the next slide? So I said that this is an additional tax reduction scheme for goods imported from the least developed countries and lower middle income countries around the world, of which, I say, about half of the countries represented here are in those economic categories. So why are we doing this? It is because we know that trade is one of the essential building blocks for countries' economic development. No country in the world has succeeded in growing economically without international trade being part of the mix. We also know it's good for UK businesses, it's good for UK consumers. So we are all very used to having a wide range of high-quality products and goods coming from all sorts of countries. We like to have that choice, and businesses can thrive and grow in the UK by being able to offer consumers more interesting, diverse origins and exciting products. And we also know that the countries that today we are widely referred to as developing countries are the fast-growing economies of the future. So there is a long-term interest for the UK. The immediate benefits for developing countries, jobs and exporters there, the benefits for UK businesses and consumers, and the longer-term partnerships and trade partnerships that we know will benefit all countries. So this is a map of where the countries are that are eligible for this scheme. We have 3 tiers, so 3 levels of additional reductions in tariffs related to the scheme. The comprehensive preferences are for the least developed countries. That's a UN classification, least developed countries. There, the light blue you can see predominantly in Africa. We have always, and we continue to charge no tariffs for everything except arms and ammunition. So the vast majority of imports of goods to this country continues to be at 0 tariff, 0 quotas. For the lower middle income countries, which are coloured in two different groups, there are a group of lower middle income countries that we classify as economically vulnerable. Their economies are exporting. They are classified as not amongst the poorest countries, but their exports are not diversified. So their economies are potentially vulnerable if there is a sudden change in sourcing from where textiles are sourced or where home and gifts goods are sourced. So they're economically vulnerable in that sense, and they benefit from a set of fairly generous reductions in tariff rates, tax rates, compared with other lower middle income countries, which are India and Indonesia in this scheme, which have some reduction beyond the global tariff, but don't need so much generosity in the scheme. So that's a brief overview of what it is, why we want to do it, and where is eligible. I'm going to pass to Rupert now to explain some of the technicalities of how the Developing Countries Trading Scheme operates. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of the policy changes we've made in the scheme that have made it essentially a lot easier for developing countries to trade with the UK and for UK buyers to source from developing countries. The first major change we've made is about tariffs, so tax. We've cut 150 new tariff lines for that middle tier that Karen talked about. That's enhanced preferences, economically vulnerable countries. This change will save £770 million per year, making it a lot more competitive for UK buyers to source from developing countries. Within that middle tier of those economically vulnerable countries, we've also increased the numbers in that tier. So we have 8 countries now in that, including countries like Algeria, Nigeria, and Tajikistan as well. It's important to note that for the least developed countries, that's the poorest countries in the world, we continue to give duty-free access, so tariff-free on everything but arms and ammunition, which is the best possible offer. On rules of origin are a whole set of rules based around content levels and processing rules as well that determine where a good comes from in the world. Now, this is really important for developing countries because they need to meet the rules of origin in order to trade with the UK and get their fantastic products to the United Kingdom. This area can be tricky and complicated at the best of times to understand. So what we've done is made it as simple and generous as possible for developing countries. So we've increased the threshold of what we call non-originating content. So that's one of the content rules for rules of origin, up to 75%. And Sabir, my colleague, is going to talk about what that actually means in practice a bit later. So for non-originating materials, it means that these least developed countries can source up to 75% of the materials for their product from anywhere in the world. which, as you can imagine, makes it a lot easier for them to manufacture products in their country and get them to the United Kingdom as well. We've also done something called extending cumulation for LDCs. So cumulation is quite a complicated topic, but it's where goods are counted as originating from a country. So least developed country can source goods from up to 95 developing countries, and they count as originating. Why does this matter? Because they count as originating, it counts as from that country, so they can source up to 100% of their materials from anywhere in these countries, these 95 developing countries, making it a lot easier for them to manufacture and get their goods to the UK. On conditions, we still have suspension based on international conventions. We've actually added conditions on climate change and the environment as well. We still have the same robust conditions on human and labour rights that we had in the previous scheme as well, so they haven't changed. We've also made sure that for that middle tier, which is economically vulnerable countries, that is assessed purely on economic vulnerability. So we've removed the need to effectively implement 27 international conventions to get part of that tier, which gives you 92% duty-free trade on goods, which is a really generous offer. The final area is on goods graduation. So this is where certain products that are really, really competitive in developing countries are not part of the scheme, so they don't harm the probability of other developing countries trading with the UK. So for certain products exported from India and Indonesia, we continue to exclude them from the scheme in this DCTS scheme. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sabir to explain a bit with some case studies about what this actually means in practice.
Yeah, thanks, Rupert. So another feature we have in this scheme is we've got two sort of regional accumulation groups. So as Rupert mentioned, accumulation is where a country can source inputs from another country and it would be counted as originating. So under the DCTS, we have two regional groups. One is the Southeast Asian beneficiary countries, so Group 1, and then we've also got Group 2, which includes the South Asian beneficiary countries. And it's also worth noting in Group 1, we've kept in Vietnam. So normally, because Vietnam now has an FTA with the UK, it would exit the scheme, but we've kept it in for one-way accumulation in the regional grouping. So this means that countries in the group, so for example, Cambodia, could use inputs from Vietnam, but not necessarily the other way around. And I think this, when we did consultation, this was something requested by particularly like bicycle manufacturers in Cambodia. So I think they use a lot of inputs from Vietnam. So it's kind of a change we made to the scheme. Within our scheme, so yeah, countries within each group, they can accumulate with any other country in the group like automatically. So in the example, in this case study, we've got sort of Bangladeshi toys, so in this case a stuffed animal, and they can use so things like stuffing from Pakistan, fabric from India. And this would be sort of intra-regional accumulation, so it would count as originating. Because Bangladesh is also an LDC, they get automatic access to the extended accumulation, which is what my colleague Rupert mentioned. So they could use buttons from Kenya. Kenya is an economic partnership agreement sort of partner with the UK, so they can use goods from there. So all of this content would count as originating. They would then need to sort of produce the stuffed animal in Bangladesh, so make sure they're fulfilling the processing rules, but then they could still export to the UK and still receive trade preferences. So it should be 0% tariff for this good. This scheme, which again my colleague Rupert alluded to, was around the use of non-originating material. So we've made a change in the scheme where around half of all HS chapters now can use up to 75% of non-originating material. So this, or these types of inputs, they can be sourced from anywhere in the world. So yeah, again, this example is sort of Cambodian rattan share. So up to 75% can be from anywhere in the world. So here we've got synthetic fibers and dye from China. Then we've got adhesives from Germany and the wood from Austria. This combined is about 75% of the product. Then they can source the rattan from Indonesia, and this is where, because Cambodia is in the same regional group as Indonesia, it's also an LDC, that 20% from Indonesia would count as originating, and then they'd need to sort of produce the chair in Cambodia, and again, could still export to the UK and receive preferences. So again, it's just to highlight that, the scheme is very generous in terms of where countries can source their inputs. They still need to meet the processing rules, so there needs to be some value add in the kind of exporting country, but we've made it very generous in terms of where they source the inputs. And again, one of the aims of this is to kind of support regional supply chains and also allow countries, if they don't have the manufacturing capability in one of the inputs, they can still source it and still produce some of the goods kind of related to that original input. It's also worth noting as well, this is like considerably more generous than what was under the UK GSP and also other trade preferences schemes in the world. So I think US GSP allows around 35% of non-originating material, and the EU GSP around 48%. So in comparison, the UK scheme is considerably more generous. I'll hand back over to my colleague Rupert.
Fantastic, thanks. So the scheme entered into force on the 19th of June, so now it's all open, it's ready, there's lots of opportunity here. We have created this kind of one-stop shop for everything you could possibly want to know or even not know about the DCTS, which is our scheme, the Developing Countries Trading Scheme, which is all on our gov.uk site. For a gov.uk site, it has lots of videos, PDF materials, an online tariff tool as well. So it is quite interactive to use, and there's lots of information there. For example, on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see if you're a UK buyer and you want to buy socks, for example, you can go on our gov.uk site, look at just buy socks, and look at the trade flows from all of these developing countries to the UK, which can be, it's interesting anyway, but if it's actually your job, it's really useful as well. When I talked briefly, and Sevilla did as well, about the quite complicated rules of origin that are in any trades policy scheme, we have a rules of origin lookup tool on this tool on the left. So for your product, say, I'll pick the example of socks again, you can just simply type in socks, and it will tell you all of the processing and rules of origin tools that you need in order to go from a developing country and sell your product to the United Kingdom, which is really useful for manufacturers in developing countries, but also for UK buyers, working out how difficult it is to get products from developing countries to the United Kingdom. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a number of detailed guides that we've done on everything from rules of origin to tariffs, and also all of the kind of conditions, human rights elements of the scheme as well. That's all on gov.uk, both in downloadable PDF materials and also online in accessible versions as well. We've also got a very short 30-second video, so when you're in the coffee queue today, or if you have a spare couple of minutes, please do have a look, because it is quite fun and interesting as well. I'll end there, but I'll just say that this is our inquiries inbox. We do check this every single day, so please do let us know if you have any questions about the scheme, and even if it's something where we'll pass you on to somebody else in government, we'd be very happy to do that and be that point of contact. This is the gov.uk site that I mentioned, the one-stop shop for all DCTS, Developing Countries Trading Scheme information. We've also got a number of flyers that are on the table out here, but we'll hand them out at the end. They've got the gov.uk website on them and a summary of everything we've tried to talk about today. So I'll end there and maybe hand over to Q&A questions.
Perfect,
Thanks.
thank you.